The Brew and Ink podcast. All right, and welcome everyone back to another Brew and Ink podcast. We have a guest with us today. It is Sharon Hink, and we are happy to have her back on the show. She's got another book to share with us, and boy, is it a good one, guys. I couldn't put it down. I read it in basically like 2 days, and I don't read voraciously, really. Sometimes it's hard for me to like get all the way through a book, but this one, I was telling my wife, I was like, just let me, I got like 30 more pages. Let me get through it.
I love that you said that because it is a big book. So I'm really impressed that you read it that fast.
Well, it was like 2 dedicated days of, had a lot of free time on my hand. But yeah, no, we are happy to have you back. And I am happy to share a cup of Quokka. Is that how you would say?
Yes, that's right.
I love that your books always have a themed drink to go with
There's
them.
It fits with your podcast. There's always a drink that they're brewing for each different story world. So
and Quokka is a very nice and like very comforting drink, something that you want to have nice and sweet. And I do like, just to not to get in too much into it. Well, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself a little bit,
okay.
But I'd like that you played with the whole idea of someone coming from this cold climate and then getting brought down to a southern warm climate, like really out of her, just her normal everyday life. And this drink that she really likes isn't even available there. And it doesn't even fit kind of with the weather and whatnot there. It's not as that comforting warm drink in the cold weather. So she's having to really adjust to all that. But just those small little things really make you think about home. And I think that was a big theory throughout the story was, what is home? Where do we feel at home? As a kid, we grow up and home is like where your parents are. Home is where you come home after school and where you grow up. But then as you get older, you move out and home becomes a different definition for where you live. And the saying is, home is where the heart is, but a lot of times your heart is kind of in different places,
right?
And so I really like that nod to it, not just through like trying to describe with words, but like the visceral, like these are things that I miss from my home, like just a simple drink, something that
I hadn't thought of it that way, but because I looked at some of the things that she lost, that was the challenge for me, was my story question always with the character. As I start a novel, my story question for her was, what does a person do when they find themselves in a place they didn't expect, not by their choice, when they're thrown into an experience, a life situation, a move, a different job, whatever, that they didn't choose. They did not choose this change. They did not select this adventure.
Right.
How do you respond, and how do you cope with the many losses that can come with that? And in her case, Jolan the Dream Teller, she was betrayed. She lost fellowship and community. She lost her home country. She lost her friends.
Her betrothed.
Yes, and could have come very close to losing her faith, because it was such a confusing experience. Like, why would God allow this? And I think many people find themselves in a place like that of, why am I here and what am I supposed to get out of it? And they're trying to see some sense of purpose, but we don't always find it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. We don't always see that, at least not right away.
Right. And sometimes it's not made obvious to us. And I thought you did a great job with her character, to Jolan's character, of going through the ebbs and flows of being the voice of faith, and then being the faltering voice, and then realizing why, maybe I'm holding on to these things that I don't need to be holding on to. I'm kind of coming full circle. So the book is called Dream of Kings. And
thank you for saying that. I guess I should have said that up front.
Yeah, well, I had mentioned it, but I just wanted to, what you did with it was a really good story in itself, but at the same time, it does pull from, and you say this in the acknowledgement, it pulls from an allegory of a biblical story.
Actually, several, because Yeah, and I think it's okay to talk about it. I know we haven't, the publisher didn't want to overemphasize the biblical inspirations of the story too much. Felt that it might be kind of a spoiler, but the story diverges so much from
It really does.
the core story that I don't think it matters. But clearly, people who are familiar with the Old Testament know that there was somebody betrayed and sold to an enemy country who could tell people what their dreams meant. So that it clearly borrows from that. That's a jumping off point for Jolan's story. But there's also hints of Daniel and Esther and, you know, other biblical stories of people put in these situations and how, you know, what do they wrestle with? And so.
Yeah, and I thought you did a great job of layering kind of those archetypal structures in there, but the story itself
it goes all over the place.
Yeah, it's totally
so many places I didn't expect. I remember the moment when Jolan is meeting the king of Sabor and looks over and sees his bondsman standing in the corner.
Yes.
And we looked at each other and I went, oh no. I knew what was
my characters just made eyes at each other. Oh no.
Yes. And that was not my intention at all. But that raised a lot of good questions for me, because I thought about Joseph's journey in scripture and how did he feel serving an enemy king, an enemy pharaoh, and marrying into that culture. And I mean, there's so many interesting questions that rose for me that deepened my understanding of some of the biblical stories. But mostly it was fun. There's intrigue, there's poison, there's spies, there's, you know, just all kinds of adventure.
And it all centers around Jolan and her ability to be this dream teller. So what she's able to do is she's and I like how she has to always kind of repeat it to other people that aren't dream tellers, but she's like, no, I can't read your mind. I'm not reading your mind. But she's able to, when someone kind of asks her, or if she kind of reaches out, she's able to intuit and see these visions of the dreams that they've had. Usually
which people in that world don't remember their dreams. They wake up unsettled. They know maybe a flash of something, but they have to go to a dream teller to find out, what did I dream?
Yeah.
Which is where I borrowed more from the story of Daniel.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was, you know, I mean, it's one thing for a king to say, interpret my dream for me, but to say, I don't remember what I dreamed. What did I dream? And what does it mean?
Yeah.
That was being pretty demanding, I thought. And so she's more in that situation that Daniel was in, of being, you know, of saying, what did I dream? What does it mean? And what do I do about it? And then has to navigate all of that. And just so many, I just love so many of the characters. And some of the characters are very hard to pin down, like Queen Lily Erlan. You're not sure. Is she an enemy or an ally? And where will this sort of friendship go? And
and the way that you introduced her too was through another character that you started showing, like, oh, they have some of their own shady dealings going on the side here. And that was the character that recommended Jolan to talk to the queen. So I'm like, oh no, is there a whole intrigue going on with this part of it? So you did great layering those kind of not so much red herrings. Yeah, it wasn't
just lots of sneaky characters that you weren't ever sure what they were up to. And
and I think my I wouldn't say my favorite part, but I think one of the parts where I went like, oh, okay, I'm into this book, was after she was already with the Duke and the Duchess, and then she's kind of wrongfully blamed for things and ends up in the prison, and she ends up in the prison tower. And you had already done a good job of saying, you know, as they're walking in, he's like, you don't want to end up there. It's like, oh,
right, lots of foreshadowing.
But then you get to meet Perry first early on at the Duke and Duchess house, and I thought he was a great character. You did a great job with him, even if you did him wrong. It's, you know.
I know. I'm going to take a lot of flack. I adored Perry. I adored him. So, and again, the story took some twists I wasn't planning on. And Yeah, he had that one dream that was so beautiful.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, this is interesting. What does this mean? Because I'm kind of discovering as I write. And then I realized what it meant.
Yeah,
So
and the
I
way
didn't
you
think too
tied that
much.
in, yeah, the way you tied that in was great. But also in the jail cell, you introduced us to Pedo, the Lana Lee. Is that how you would
Uh-huh.
say it? Lana
Yep.
Lee. And I just thought both of those characters were really cool concepts because Perry was Wild On
Wild on. Yep.
characters that they're almost like a patchwork of color
Hmm.
and very vibrant hair and very unique. And then with Pedo, it was, I liked the way that you described their eyes really showing through their emotions, and like that changes colors as they have different emotions. And you described them as bird-like, and that just it it painted a great mental image for me. Like I could see it, and I liked you went back to it, you played with, she's able to really pick up on what these creatures were thinking or feeling just by the colors of their eyes. And did you have any like real world inspiration for those characters, or was that just all fun and
I don't,
imagination?
yeah, I stumbled across them in the story as I was writing. It
Yeah.
was like, here's this character, and oh, I guess I got to describe what the character looks like. And that's what I saw. I don't know. I don't know.
And
My,
that's
my
how
brain
it
is a very
happens.
strange and imaginative place.
Well, it shows. It does. You did a great job of building this world, and it's much different than your other stories.
Yeah.
Um,
I think I pushed myself a little more to be even more creative. I feel like my other, the sort of lyric series was, well, it was a pretty unique world in that it had some technology, but also a little bit of that Middle Ages style fantasy with swords and things, and some different cultures, but
yeah.
not quite as bizarre and strange of cultures or climatic things like with weather and with, stuff
Right.
like that. And I also like, and then in Dancing Realms, it felt like, I mean, yes, they were on a floating island, which is weird, but the people all felt very human and very human formed and not super unusual. And so I thought it's time to stretch a little bit and kind of create,
A little bit more of a fantasy
yeah,
realm, if you will.
yeah, get a little bit more imaginative and create this culture that's dependent on Kolith and what's going to happen when those mines collapse. And I don't know, just it was a fun world to spend a couple years in as I was writing.
Yeah.
And I'm
And
so delighted you liked it. I love
yeah,
hearing the parts that connected with you. That's so fun.
yeah. And it was one of those where I'd be reading, I'm like, ooh, I need to like write that down. I like that idea, or I want to talk about that. And one of the things that stuck out to me early on, you talk about it and you bring it up a couple times throughout the story, and even again you kind of ended with that, was the focus on the three moons, and how they, as they move across the sky, there's sort of like a tail of light that comes out behind them, and then they end up forming what you call the midnight rings.
Mhm.
Now, is that when the three moons are layered on top of each other as one, or is it like as they're kind of
It's
touching 3 points?
as they orbit, then their tails form a circle.
Circle. Okay,
So then
yeah.
there's like this ring in the sky created by their when they're
Swirling
yeah, because at first their orbits are whatever, and
further
then
apart.
yeah, and then it creates that. So yeah, that's always fun too, is playing with what's happening. I know in sort of lyric series it was gray overcast sky, no one ever saw the sun. And then
Right.
I had to challenge myself of, well, then what kind of science did they develop? They wouldn't have a sundial, they wouldn't have, how do they measure time differently, how do they, so everything you create as far as sun and moon and planets and how it all works affects the culture and affects how things have developed. And so that was fun too. And I got more into the geopolitics than I had planned to. It got very complicated about
Yeah.
how Rideron and their treaty with Sabor, but then there's the Wildon, and then there's the Lanalee, but the Lanalee were letting Sabor go into
Brew.
Wildon, and so now
Yeah.
that's caused conflict. And I mean, there was a lot going on with these different countries, and that added a lot of stakes, a lot of high stakes, and a lot of danger and worry.
Yeah, I feel like you were kind of, as a writer, you're probably more like Jolan, and you're like, I'm not into all this intrigue and all the back, and then next thing you know, you're like, I'm having to write this all. She
Yeah,
got thrown into
I'm
the midst
stuck
of
in
it.
the middle of it. I
Yeah.
know. I have to say, I think one of my favorite scenes was the ball, the grand ball.
Oh yeah.
Which is kind of not something I typically do. I don't do a lot of describing pretty dresses that people wear, or the kind of romance novel scene.
Right.
But it was really fun creating, picturing the decorations, picturing what people were wearing, describing how they fixed their hair, and
Yep.
the music. And then there's a moment out on the balcony where a bad guy really gets it. And I loved that. I loved reading that. It was very cathartic.
It's funny that you bring it up, because that covers two other points where I was like, oh, I love that. I said, I learned a lot about just women's apparel and hairstyles from Jolan.
And yeah, I usually don't say much about it. People are in sort of lyric, it's like she's in a tunic and pants. Everybody's wearing tunic and pants. It just
no, but she talked about her like bodice with the I don't even remember what it was called, but like the sew-in ruffles or whatever. And I was like, I have to look that up. Oh, okay, that's what she talked about. But I did really like that scene out on the balcony, and how you gave someone their comeuppance in the way that you did it.
That was fun.
Yeah, just you had some good payoffs, is what I would say, where you had characters maybe that were somewhere that you didn't expect them to be, hearing things that you didn't know they'd be hearing, and it was getting close to those like somewhat frustrating stories where like nothing goes in the main character's favor, and I was like, oh no, is this just going to keep getting worse for her? But then you had those moments that were, I thought I appreciated the direction you went, because it had a payoff and a good feeling, and yes, it was still like a yes, but like, okay, she still has to figure out these things, and you did a great job of like, the pace was just one thing after another.
Oh, good.
With her, yeah. Even amongst all of that, she still managed to find a way to like get over her long last love relationship that she lost, and then the one that she felt betrayed by, and figure out how to fall in love again amongst all of that.
I had not planned at all. Because when I was inspired by the story of Joseph, I was thinking, okay, and the theme there is forgiveness. He's betrayed by his brothers, but what you meant for evil, God meant for good, and he forgives his brothers. But the story went a whole different direction, and the themes were very much more about grief and loss, which makes sense when I look back. I had written like 2/3 of the book, and then was caring for my mom, and she passed away, and so then I was just in this heavy, heavy grief, and wasn't sure I'd ever get the book finished, and then went back to it and finished it, and realized I was grappling with, for Jolan's character, all the things that she lost, and how she thinks about, it's right at the beginning where you find out that she's a widow, and so she's got that loss, and then all the other losses that happen throughout the book, and she thinks of them as books in her little mental library that she pulls out and flips through, but they just cause her such pain. All this, here's another one of loss, and here's another book of loss, and then that gradually transforms throughout the story, and that was very cathartic for me to be dealing with that theme as I was finishing the book, and I was amazed at what came out. There ended up being a lot of joy in the story, considering what
the topics of grief.
That it's got loss and grief and struggle and hazards and dangers and all of that. But then there was romance, and there was joy, and there was discovery and friendships, and
I would say another through theme to the book was really one's calling, or our calling, to serve truthfully and faithfully even those that we might consider to be our enemies or in the
Yes.
midst of our enemies.
Yes.
And like the way that God can call us into that. And we might even think like, oh, he's not here with me because look at where I am. Look what these choices I'm having to make. But
Right.
I like that she was confronted with that kind of again and again, like, do I be truthful with this? And then it always showed like, because she was truthful, people could trust her. And then she was given more,
Mm-hmm.
you know, more whatever it was, because she went through a lot of different stages of where she was at.
That struggle too of how do I respond to this? How do I respond to that? I think a lot of us deal with that in our day-to-day lives. I mean, not on an epic scale like her adventure, but we struggle with, how am I supposed to respond to this specific thing? And we feel these moral dilemmas, and we're wanting to serve our provider, our creator, you know, and not always sure of how to. And
and she ran into the thought a lot of, if I help this guy, is it actually going to be worse for my own, not just her, but her people, and other innocents?
Yep. So it just, I keep coming back in my own faith walk that God really desires relationship with us. And so instead of it being like 10 steps of this is how you are supposed to live, and, you know, with subheadings and, you know, clear instructions with no ambiguity, he wants us to be turning to him throughout every day with all these dilemmas we face, because then we're always communicating with him. We're in relationship, we're listening, we're trying to follow. And I think that shows the depth of his love for us, is that he really wants an interactive relationship with us.
And you inserted some good characters in there too. Camor, is that how you would say it? Camor. Mm-hmm. Camor and Perry both ended up being very good, solid characters for her in her faith, by kind of always pulling her back to, hey, you know, you're here because this is his will, or, you know, and I like the names that you gave, the provider or the creator. And, you know, Perry would say this, you know, this is where you're supposed to be, you're in his will or whatever. And then, they would always bring her back to that realization of her faith, and what was it really predicated on? Was it predicated on her situation and the things that she had at her disposal, or was it predicated on the opportunities that she was given and how she responded to those? And was it helping or hurting? Like, was she lashing out in anger or wanting retribution, or was she willing to forgive? And those sort of, I just liked how you put in those sort of characters that were sort of her rock to go back on, that, or even challenge her own level of faith.
I think they kind of pushed against each other in good ways, some of those characters, and their different understandings of faith, and, you know, asking each other hard questions sometimes.
And then I wanted to hit this one quote that you had towards the end, and obviously it's a very climactic moment, but I really liked how you just worded it, and it starts with something, but I don't really want to say the beginning of the phrase because it gives away too much. But then she says, we're like sky ribbons that weave together. Every dark night grows brighter when I'm with you. And then he responds, in the circle of the creator's unending love. And in that moment, it was, for what you were talking about between those characters, it was powerful, but then also just like that whole thought of like, in the circle of the creator's unending love. I don't know, it spoke to me. It was, it was nice. It made me kind of stop and think like, this is good. Like, it all is supposed to be encompassed within that circle of the creator's unending love. And I think that unending part is what we tend to forget sometimes. Sometimes we think, oh, it's conditional, based on my choices, my behaviors, or whatever. But
now that's what I really pray, is that people will find, I mean, I pray that they'll just have a blast reading the adventure and love the characters like I did. but that also they'll feel encouraged and inspired. I was inspired by Perry, his example. I was inspired by Jolan and the choices that she made that were hard choices.
Yeah.
And then I was inspired by watching how God had purpose in things, not always easy, not always clear to a human mind, but there was enough hint of what he was up to. Just like in the story of Joseph, there's that sense of, okay, there was a purpose here that none of us could see at the time. And it helps make sense of things that hurt in our lives.
The other quote that you had from there, which was really good because it was talking about her ability to read dreams, and people just kind of like, a lot of the characters thought, oh, you're just mind reading, or, oh, you just, can pull it out whenever you need to. And first off, like, I like that you talked about not everyone has dreams. Like some people dream, and some people's dreams, are more important than others. Like you said, oh, the king is having these dreams because he's in a position that he can do something about it. But not everyone has dreams. Not everyone remembers their dreams, but our dreams usually are trying to tell us something, or some sort of communication, I believe, from, and as I, from reading your story, you believe as well, from the creator, from a higher power that wants to sort of help guide us. And there are those that can interpret those sorts of just through intuition or reading the word. Usually the spirit will lead and reveal something. But in your book, you quoted Jolan as saying, dreams are a gift, and we can't demand them when we wish, but simply welcome them when they are given. And I felt like that is a lot of how we deal with prayers too. Like, the answers to prayers are not always the answers that we're asking for or looking for, but a lot of times the answer is a gift that's given to us, and are to be welcomed when given. But even with dreams too, like, I don't dream every night,
Well, and I put that little author's note at the end because I also didn't want people going, ooh, we should pay lots of attention to what we dream and what it means. And it's like, no, we have scripture. We have the body of Christ. We have so many ways. And if God happens to give you a dream sometimes that has some meaning that he wants to speak to you, that's cool. He can do that. But I get leery of chasing experiences in the Christian walk rather than simply following the shepherd, just being the little sheep following the shepherd, not all the cool experiences. Dug into all the people in the Bible who had dreams. And interestingly, a lot of them were not good people. And the dreams were not about happy things. And so I did a 30-day devotion book called Devotions for Dreamers. And the hardcover turned out so gorgeous.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful. And they surprised me. They didn't tell me ahead of time that they were going to do gold embossing on the cover. That's inside. So nice. So
I like that, because when I read hardcovers, I like to take the flap off while I'm reading it, so it doesn't get destroyed. But then it's always nice to have a
really pretty cover. It turned out really good, and it's not a series, so it's just a standalone. So people who don't want to commit to, if I don't totally love it, I'll have to 5 more books or whatever to find out what happens. No, it's all in one book, and I think it turned out pretty good.
Yeah. No, I definitely enjoyed it. I'm going to recommend it to all my friends.
You made me really, really feel good about this book.
Oh, so good. Thank you. I'm glad. Yes. Yeah.
I love the stuff you noticed and the things you pulled out of it. And it just makes me really happy.
Yeah.
It just makes me fall in love with those characters all over again.
Awesome.
Hearing somebody else being introduced to them is so fun. It's like I'm introducing good friends to my other friends, and
so. And now I get to go have book grief now that I've gone through the characters. They're not there anymore. There's not going to be a second book.
It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Well, after October 11th too, the audiobook is coming out, and I got to chat with the narrator. She is delightful, and I'm absolutely positive it's going to turn out really good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I really dig. I mean, obviously as a podcast, we love audio, but I love audiobooks. And that's been my biggest challenge is do I want to buy it in hard copy or audiobook with a lot of these books? I'm like, oh, I have free credit. Oh, I was going to read that, but I'll just use my free credit to get audio.
Yep.
So I love it. All right. Well, it was a pleasure having you again, Sharon. We'll always have you back whenever you want. If you just want to chat about something you're writing, something you're watching, anything like that, with pleasure to have you.
Well, thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
This is encouraging. And
yes, it's always encouraging to read your stuff and talk with you. And then we'll give an official sign off. Raise a glass to inspiration.
All right.
Stay inspired, guys.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thanks, Sharon.